There is a silent, almost never questioned belief that success is something to be pursued, that which can be achieved, that which is being pursued. This belief is so deeply ingrained that few people realize how much internal tension it creates. Searching is stressful. Pursuing something requires effort. Running is a sign of misalignment. When the mind is aligned, it does not seek. She's attractive. This is not a metaphor. That's the law. The mind is not merely a space where thoughts pass through. It is a field, and fields don't ask. Compass emit. Everything that comes your way responds to the field you cultivate, not what you want. I disagree with what you're saying, but to what is constant within you. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, there is no excessive effort. There is consistency. Emotional consistency creates stability. Stability creates trust. Trust creates a response. The world responds to stable fields. He always answered. Most people try to attract success with intention, but repel it with their own internal state. They want progress, but they are fueled by fear. They want prosperity, but they live in a state of urgency. They crave recognition, but they diminish themselves internally. This contradiction doesn't need to be verbalized to be perceived. It is felt. The mistake is not in the desire. He's in the field. A mind that has become a natural magnet does not sway emotionally with every stimulus. She doesn't react to everything. She doesn't correct herself all the time. She remains. Staying is what creates magnetism. What is constantly changing is not attractive. What stabilizes creates gravity. Gravity is not force. It just happens. When the mind stops wavering, something changes in the body. Breathing slows down. The muscles relax. The gaze lingers. This is not aesthetics. It's internal security. A healthy nervous system provides more support. It fosters greater responsibility. It sustains more value. It fosters greater abundance. Even an unstable mind can touch success. But he can't keep it, because magnetism is not conquest. It is permanence. When your mind becomes a natural magnet, you don't try to convince anyone. Don't over-explain. You don't overdo it. You simply are, and what is aligned is recognized. Most people confuse intensity with magnetism, but intensity is tiring. Magnetism calms. Magnetic people don't exert pressure. They stabilize the surrounding environment. You can feel it when you come into contact with someone like that. There is less noise, less tension, less need to defend oneself. This happens because that person is not experiencing an internal conflict. The magnetic mind does not fight against itself. She doesn't contradict herself. It doesn't split. She thinks, feels, and stands in the same direction. This alignment creates a clear signal. Clear signs always find a response. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, time changes. Not because things are speeding up. But why do you stop delaying because of anxiety? You don't feel rushed. He doesn't miss it. You don't feel a constant sense of urgency. These states disappear because they were symptoms of misalignment. Calmness is not passivity. It is organized power. Sustained calm creates silent authority. Silent authority does not need to be asserted. She is noticed. And everything that is perceived governs decisions. Success doesn't choose who shouts the loudest. Choose who you support. That's the law. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you don't try to appear confident. You don't rehearse your posture. You don't create a character. You become emotionally predictable. And emotional predictability is one of the greatest signs of security. The world trusts those who don't waver. Invest in those who don't fall apart. He responds to those who do not contradict themselves. The magnetic mind does not change its internal position with each piece of feedback. She listens without getting lost. Adjust without shrinking. This ability creates maturity. Maturity sustains prosperity. Without maturity, any gain becomes a threat. With maturity, earnings become the foundation. A mind that becomes a natural magnet does not live in anticipation. She doesn't try to predict everything. Don't try to control everything. She trusts her own core. Trusting your own core values is not arrogance. It's alignment. This alignment eliminates internal noise. When the noise subsides, the field clears. Clean fields are naturally attractive. You don't need to chase opportunities when the field is clear. They approach because they encounter no resistance. Resistance has always been the problem, not the world. Not the people, not time. Internal resistance created by misaligned thoughts. When this resistance falls, magnetism emerges. Not as an event, as a state. This state becomes your base. And when that happens, something within you stabilizes. You can feel it. You don't need to run. You foster greater prosperity. His presence changes. That's the law. This is inevitable. This always works. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, something fundamental ceases to happen. You stop opposing yourself. Internal opposition is the greatest invisible obstacle that exists. It doesn't present itself as explicit sabotage. She presents herself as overly cautious, as constant self-criticism, like endless adjustments. You think you're being responsible, but it's being divided. The magnetic mind is not the one that thinks the most. It is the one that thinks in the same direction for long enough to create coherence. Consistency doesn't come from force. It stems from the silent decision not to contradict oneself. When you contradict yourself internally, your body feels it first. The body always feels it first. He goes on alert. In microvoltage, on defensive alert. This state does not sustain abundance. Abundance requires inner space. And interior space only exists where there is security. A mind that becomes a natural magnet is a safe mind. Not because everything is guaranteed, but because she trusts herself. Trusting yourself doesn't mean believing that everything will turn out right. It's knowing that you won't get lost, even if something goes wrong. This difference changes everything. When you trust yourself, you don't need to anticipate so much. There's no need to protect yourself before impact. You don't need to live in emotional calculation. Emotional calculation drains energy, and drained energy does not magnetize. A magnetic mind conserves energy. She doesn't waste attention on imaginary scenarios. Avoid engaging in unproductive internal dialogues. It remains clear. Clarity is magnetism. Lack of intellectual clarity, emotional clarity. It's when you know who you are, even without knowing exactly what's going to happen. This stability creates a field that the world recognizes. Not consciously, but instinctively. People can tell when someone isn't trying to prove themselves. They can sense when someone isn't asking permission to exist. This creates silent respect. Silent respect creates openness. Openness creates opportunities that don't need to be forced. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you realize that you don't need to overexpose yourself to be seen. You don't need to over-explain yourself to be understood. You don't need to sell yourself to be chosen. You become a reference point. References don't run, they remain. Most people live in a state of internal displacement. Always a little out of sorts, a little anxious, a little late. This displacement prevents magnetism. The magnetic mind is entirely present where it is. She doesn't live in constant projection. He doesn't live on the run. Don't live in anticipation. She lives in the present moment without anxiety. This presence changes the rhythm. You don't speed up to keep up with the world. The world is slowing down around you. This is not external power. It's internal organization. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, the quality of effort changes. You don't exhaust yourself in order to move forward. You move when there is alignment. Aligned movement generates less wear and tear and more impact. Impact doesn't come from quantity. It comes from density. Density is sustained presence. Sustained presence creates gravity. Gravity attracts. That's the law. An unstable mind can even attract curiosity, but it doesn't attract commitment. The world approaches, observes, and moves away because he feels there is no foundation. The magnetic mind creates a foundation, emotional basis, energy base, identity foundation. You don't change characters as the context changes. You take the same axis wherever you go. This creates predictability. Predictability is not monotony. It's about security. Security is what allows for expansion. Without security, everything that grows is frightening. A mind that becomes a natural magnet is not afraid of growth. She adapts without losing herself. She doesn't collapse when given more responsibility. Don't sabotage yourself when something goes right. She supports it. Sustainability is the invisible skill that defines true prosperity. Not to conquer, to support. Most people want to grow. Few are prepared to sustain growth. Prepare a magnetic mind, not with techniques, with continuous alignment. When thought, emotion, and action come together, the nervous system understands that it is safe to proceed. And when the nervous system understands this, it allows for more presence, more clarity, more tolerance. This tolerance is not emotionally explosive. She is calm. Calmness is the clearest sign of inner power, not apathetic calm. Deep-rooted calm, the calmness of someone who doesn't need to rush. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you realize you are no longer trying to control life. You are responding to her. Responding is different from reacting. Reacting is automatic. Responding is a conscious act. A magnetic mind responds. She doesn't let herself be carried away by impulses. She chooses. Choosing doesn't get tiring when there's alignment. The exhaustion stemmed from the internal struggle. When this struggle ends, the energy returns. You feel more whole, more present, less dispersed. This wholeness changes the way you enter environments. How do you speak? Listen, you don't invade. It doesn't hide, you occupy. Occupying space without tension is pure magnetism. The world responds to those who occupy space naturally, not to those who force it, not to those who beg. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you no longer live trying to be chosen. You become someone who can choose. This reversal completely changes the dynamics of life. You don't accept just anything just to avoid losing. You respect your territory. Respecting one's own territory is one of the greatest demonstrations of inner maturity. And inner maturity is what sustains abundance. Not as an event, as a state. This state is not euphoric. It's stable. You feel like something inside you has become organized. Not on the outside, inside. You don't need to run. You don't need to prove it. You don't need to convince anyone. You support it, and what is sustained becomes inevitable. That's the law. This is inevitable. This always works. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you realize something almost disconcerting. Life stops requiring constant effort to happen. Not because everything becomes easy, but why don't you stop bothering me? For a long time, you believed you needed to push, forcing decisions, anticipate movements, to prove ability. This pushing wasn't driven by ambition. It stemmed from internal insecurity. A misaligned mind pushes because it lacks trust. She tries to guarantee results because she can't stand waiting. She speeds up because she's afraid of losing. When the mind aligns, the pushing ceases. And when it ceases, something is revealed. Many things were not blocked. They were simply waiting for consistency. Consistency doesn't attract attention, but organize everything around it. A mind that becomes a natural magnet does not react to the world as a threat. She doesn't interpret every event as a value test. She doesn't turn setbacks into personal attacks. She maintains her balance. And the axis changes the way we read reality. Without an axle, everything feels heavy. With a central axis, everything finds its place. You start to notice that you don't get offended easily. It doesn't get disrupted by criticism. He doesn't get carried away by praise. This neutrality is not coldness, it's emotional maturity. Emotional maturity is one of the unseen foundations of sustained success. Without it, any stimulus becomes a trigger. With it, stimuli pass through without causing disruption. A magnetic mind does not cling to what is fleeting. He doesn't run away from what's coming. She remains. And staying's a daily choice, not a heroic choice, a silent choice. The choice not to split up, to not think one thing and feel another, to not harbor fear while speaking courage. This choice creates alignment. Alignment creates stability. Stability creates magnetism. There are no shortcuts here. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you realize that your relationship with no changes. You no longer interpret no as rejection. You see it as an adjustment. A misaligned mind struggles with the no. An aligned mind listens. Listening is not the same as giving in. It's about discernment. Discernment is born from calmness. Calm doesn't come when everything is resolved. It emerges when you trust your own center. This confidence does not depend on external guarantees. It comes from the repeated experience of not giving up. You start to notice that you don't explain things as much. It's not that justified. Don't ask for so many confirmations. Not because it closed, but because it stabilized. Stability reduces noise. And where there is less noise, there is more response. Life responds better when it doesn't have to go through layers of internal tension. Magnetism doesn't shout, he invites. Magnetic people don't compete for attention. They attract attention. You can feel it when you're near someone like that. There is less need to prove anything, less competition, less comparison. This happens because that person is not in competition with themselves. A magnetic mind cannot be measured all the time. She doesn't compare trajectories. She doesn't put pressure on herself to keep up with other people's pace. She respects her own time. Respecting time creates solidity. Solidity creates external trust. The world trusts those who trust their own pace. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you realize you no longer need to over-adapt to fit in. You fit in by being who you are. This doesn't detract from what matters. Get rid of what doesn't support you. And this separation is not a loss, it's organized. Organization is a silent form of prosperity. Prosperity doesn't begin with gain. It starts with internal order. Internal order is not the same as rigid control. It's a smooth alignment. You know what's yours. You know what it isn't. Do you know where it is? You know when to leave. This clarity reduces wear and tear. Less wear and tear frees up energy. Released energy becomes presence. Presence becomes magnetism. Everything follows the same logic. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you realize you no longer need to anticipate emotions. There's no need to suffer prematurely. There's no need to rehearse defenses. You trust that I will respond when necessary. That confidence changes everything. You move more economically, more precisely, with more intention. Each action carries more weight because it stems from alignment. A misaligned mind is very active. A ment magnetica aged certo. Doing the right thing doesn't mean doing too little. It's about acting from the center, and the axis is internal. When you lose your balance, any action becomes an attempt. When you maintain the axis, any action becomes an extension. Stretching doesn't tire you out. Trying is tiring. Most people are tired of trying, not to act, to try. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you stop trying. You do, and starting from the alignment is simple. Not easy, simple. Simple doesn't mean shallow. It's straightforward. A magnetic mind doesn't create unnecessary stories. She doesn't dramatize things. It does not amplify noise. She observes, decides, it sustains. This sequence creates inevitability. Inevitability is not mystical destiny. It's a structural consequence. When something is sustained for long enough, it becomes inevitable. A magnetic mind sustains. No effort required. In person. Continuous presence creates a field. The field attracts a response. That's the law. You start to notice your energy shifting before any external results appear. And that's the biggest confirmation that something has aligned. You no longer depend on the outcome to feel right. You feel right before. This does not create complacency. Create a foundation. The base allows for construction. Without a foundation, everything crumbles. From a solid foundation, everything grows. A mind that becomes a natural magnet builds an emotional foundation. This base does not fluctuate easily. She doesn't disappear on difficult days. It doesn't explode on good days. She remains. Staying is rare. And anything that is rare attracts value. You don't need to announce this change. She is noticed. People can sense when someone is no longer pursuing them. When someone is no longer trying to convince you, that person becomes a role model. References don't compete. They provide guidance without speaking. The aura of success is established when the mind stops wavering and begins to emit a clear signal. The sign doesn't ask for anything. He simply is. And the world responds to what it is. You feel like something inside you has become organized. Not as excitement, as a foundation. You don't need to run. You don't need to prove it. You don't need to force it. You support it. And what is sustained becomes inevitable. That's the law. This is inevitable. This always works. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you begin to notice something subtle yet definitive. The need for control decreases. Not because you've given up on directing your own life, but because you no longer need to control every detail to feel safe. Excessive control has always been a substitute for internal trust. When trust is established, control is relaxed. And when control is relaxed, the flow appears. Flow is not disorder. It's order without rigidity. The magnetic mind knows when to act, and you know when not to act. This sensitivity cannot be learned. It emerges when the internal noise dissipates. The noise came from the constant attempt to predict, adjust, anticipate, and correct. All of this was an effort to compensate for the misalignment. When alignment is achieved, the effort is reorganized. You don't do less. You do it with more precision. Precision is born from presence. Presence is born from calm. Calmness stems from inner security. Internal security is the true source of abundance. Without it, any progress creates fear. With it, progress creates stability. A mind that becomes a natural magnet doesn't live waiting for validation. She doesn't measure her worth by the immediate response of the world. She knows who it is before the answer. This completely changes how you position yourself. You don't enter spaces asking for space. You enter by occupying your own space, not by imposition. By nature. Naturalness is pure magnetism. The world responds better to what is natural than to what is forced. He always answered. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you realize you no longer need to adapt emotionally to everything. You don't absorb any kind of atmosphere. It doesn't carry any tension. You choose what you internalize. This choice is not made consciously all the time. It is structural. Its foundation has changed. Solid bases filter naturally. You start to notice that certain conversations no longer drain you. Certain environments don't disrupt your sense of organization. Certain pressures don't throw you off balance. This is not indifference, it's stability. Stability creates quiet authority. Silent authority doesn't need to be announced. She is recognized. People tend to listen more when you talk less. Observe more when you react less. This happens because its presence has gained density. Density is not the same as emotional weight. It's profound. Depth commands respect. Respect that comes from the depths of the earth does not waver. He doesn't depend on his mood. It doesn't depend on performance. It arises from sustained consistency. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you stop explaining yourself in order to exist. You don't justify aligned decisions. There's no excuse for setting boundaries. Clear boundaries are signs of inner health. A misaligned mind confuses boundaries with loss. The magnetic mind understands boundaries as structure. The structure allows for growth. Without structure, everything that grows collapses. Prosperity requires emotional stability. It is not possible to sustain abundance while living in internal instability. The magnetic mind endures because it does not contradict itself. She doesn't say yes while thinking no. You cannot move forward while you wish to retreat. It does not desire expansion while protecting itself from growth. This consistency eliminates friction. Where there is no friction, there is fluidity. Fluidity is not immediate, but it's constant. And consistency builds inevitability. Inevitability arises when you stop interrupting your own flow. Most people interrupt their own flow out of fear, I'm unsure, in a hurry. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, these interruptions cease. You are not in a hurry to arrive. You don't punish yourself for not being there yet. You respect the process because you trust the foundation. This confidence is not hope, it's alignment. Alignment changes how you experience time. Time ceases to be the enemy. Stop being so pressured. Stop charging. Time becomes an ally. You understand that everything solid needs time to mature. This understanding does not breed passivity. It generates active patience. Active patience is the ability to maintain direction without anxiety. This ability is rare, and anything that is rare attracts value. A magnetic mind is not distracted by comparisons. She doesn't waste energy measuring other people's trajectories. She knows that each field matures at its own pace. This respect for one's own rhythm creates integrity. Integrity creates internal trust. Inner confidence creates presence. Presence creates magnetism. Everything comes back to the same point. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you no longer need to push yourself forward. You move because it makes sense. Movement ceases to be reaction, and it becomes an extension of what you uphold. Extensions don't get tiring. The exhaustion stemmed from internal conflict. When the conflict ceases, the energy returns. You feel more available. That's clearer, more complete. This wholeness changes the type of opportunity that arises. There aren't as many distractions. More precise invitations are appearing. Precision is a sign of alignment. Life becomes simpler, not because it got small, but because it remained consistent. You no longer carry excessive emotional burdens. He doesn't spend his time trying to adjust everything. You trust the foundation, and the foundation holds it together. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you realize you no longer need to prepare emotionally for everything. You are prepared because you are aligned. This preparation is not about tension, it's presence. Continuous presence is the greatest invisible asset that exists. It cannot be copied. It can't be faked. It cannot be accelerated. It is built. And when it's built, it lasts. The aura of success solidifies when this presence becomes your default state. You don't just go in and out of it. You inhabit. Living in that state changes everything. His posture changes. Its rhythm changes. Your relationship with the world changes. You don't need to run. You don't need to prove it. You don't need to convince anyone. You support it. And what is sustained becomes inevitable. That's the law. This is inevitable. This always works. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, silence takes on a different meaning. It's not absence, it's density. The silence of those who don't need to fill the space with explanations. The silence of those who do not defend themselves in advance. The silence of someone who trusts their own core. This silence communicates more than long speeches, because it stems from coherence. A misaligned mind talks too much. That explains too much, overreacts. She tries to compensate for what she lacks internally. A magnetic mind doesn't pay off. She supports it. And holding on changes the body language. Posture becomes organized. The gestures become precise. His gaze does not waver. None of this is rehearsed. It's a consequence. When the internal field stabilizes, the body aligns. And a properly aligned body sends a clear signal to the world. The world reads signs before it hears words. Always read. A mind that becomes a natural magnet also changes its relationship with error. The mistake ceases to be a threat. It ceases to be evidence against you. It becomes information. Information does not harm stable identity. It only wounds fragile identities. The fragility stemmed from internal instability. When it ceases, the error loses its power. You don't shrink. It's not justified. It cannot be explained. You adjust. And so it goes. Moving forward without drama creates continuity. Continuity builds trust. Trust creates opportunities that require maturity. Life offers no complexity to those who lack inner simplicity. It makes noise. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, the noise diminishes, not because the world has changed, but that's because you no longer vibrate at the same frequency as chaos. You realize that certain conflicts no longer affect you. Some disputes become meaningless. Certain emergencies don't call you. This is not an escape, it's alignment. Alignment creates an invisible filter. Everything that arrives must pass through it. What doesn't pass away doesn't stay. And this does not generate a loss. Create space. Space is essential for prosperity. Prosperity does not grow in saturated environments, not even external ones, not even internal. The magnetic mind creates inner space. She doesn't take on everything. It doesn't react to everything. It doesn't absorb everything. This selectivity is not coldness. It's clear. Clarity organizes priorities effortlessly. You know what matters, and what doesn't matter loses its power. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you also notice a change in how you handle expectations. You don't create inflated expectations. Don't shrink yourself so you don't get frustrated. You remain open, without attachment, without fear. Openness without fear is a heightened form of inner power. Those who live in fear shut down. Those who live in alignment remain open. This opening doesn't expose you, she strengthens you. You receive without collapsing. You move forward without getting lost. The nervous system learns that it is safe to grow. And when the nervous system learns this, it allows for more presence, more clarity, more tolerance for success. Yes, tolerance for success. Because success weighs heavily. It requires structure. The magnetic mind builds this structure without haste, without fanfare, no promise. She builds consistency through living. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you no longer need to compare yourself to others to find your way. You orient yourself using your own axis. Comparison was a sign of internal displacement. When the axis becomes stable, the comparison loses its meaning. You don't measure your life by other people's standards. You measure it by the consistency of what you stand for. This consistency creates identity. Identity is not a label. It's a continuation of the state. The world responds to ongoing identities, no to momentary attempts. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you realize that the rush was just a symptom, not a necessity. The rush stemmed from a feeling of being behind inside. Because I'm not in the right place. It's still not enough. When alignment happens, that feeling disappears. You feel you are where you need to be to support the next step, even if you don't know what it is. This feeling generates calmness. Calmness doesn't paralyze. Calm down and organize. A calm mind makes better decisions. Choose better. It provides better support. And better support changes everything. You don't get too excited when something goes right. Don't despair when something challenges you. You stay in line. A sustained line creates a trajectory. Consistent career paths attract the right allies, the right invitations, the right environments. None of this is forced. He is attracted. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you understand that you don't need to reinvent yourself all the time. You delve deeper. Going deeper creates silent mastery. Silent mastery does not seek the spotlight. She is recognized. The world recognizes those who don't need to advertise. This recognition doesn't come quickly, but come on strong. Steadfastness beats speed. He always won. The magnetic mind understands this intuitively. She doesn't run to get there. She builds to last. To remain is the true invisible victory. Not the victory that appears. What is it based on? When the mind becomes a natural magnet, You realize that life begins to organize itself around your stability. People adapt, rhythms align, invitations become clearer. Not because you demanded it, but because the field demands consistency. Coherent fields reorganize the environment. That's the law. You don't need to prove this law, you live. And as you live, something within you becomes even more stable. You don't need to run. You don't need to prove it. You don't need to convince anyone. You support it, and what is sustained becomes inevitable. That's the law. This is inevitable. This always works. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, something definitive happens. You stop waiting for permission to be who you are, not out of rebellion, not through confrontation, but because internal consistency doesn't require permission. You realize that many hesitations didn't stem from a lack of ability, but from the silent habit of adjusting too much. Adjusting too much leads to fragmentation. Fragmentation weakens the field. The magnetic mind does not fragment itself to fit into a larger space. She remains whole, and the environment adjusts. This adjustment is not immediate, but it's inevitable. Inevitability arises when you internally refuse to turn back. When one doesn't abandon their own emotional position halfway through. When you don't compromise your identity when faced with the first sign of pressure. This firmness is not harsh. It's calm. The calmness that comes from knowing where they're stepping. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you notice that you no longer react with the same intensity to everything. Not everything deserves a response. Not everything deserves energy. Not everything deserves involvement. This selection is not indifference. That's maturity. Maturity reduces waste, reduces wear and tear, reduces noise. And where there is less noise, there is more signal. The world responds to clear signals. He always answered. The magnetic mind emits a constant signal, not perfect, but stable. Stability creates emotional predictability. Emotional predictability builds trust. Trust opens doors that force never could. You begin to realize that certain opportunities no longer need to be pursued. They emerge during moments of neutrality. In moments when you weren't trying anything. This is no coincidence. It's about consistency. Internal coherence creates the right connections, the right conversations, the right invitations. Excessive trying kept that away. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you understand something essential. Success doesn't like to be pressured. He responds when he finds an opportunity, emotional space, interior space, identity space. You create that space when you stop pushing yourself. Pushing was fear disguised as effort. When fear subsides, effort becomes organized. You act less, but each action carries more weight, more intention, more impact. Real impact doesn't come from volume. It comes from alignment. Alignment reduces dispersion. And where there is no dispersion, there is power. A magnetic mind does not disperse energy in internal conflicts. She doesn't sabotage herself with silent dialogues of doubt. She is not weakened by thoughts that pull her in opposite directions. She thinks, feels, and stands by the same principles. This line is not rigid, but it is continuous. Continuity builds everything that endures. Lasting success isn't noisy. It's stable. It doesn't require constant emotional maintenance. It does not require daily validation. He simply integrates himself into your life. This happens when you stop treating success as an event and begins to treat it as a sustainable internal state. A mind that becomes a natural magnet sustains states. No peaks. Peaks are tiring. States build. You begin to feel that your relationship with the future is changing. There is no more constant anxiety, not even excessive idealization. There is direction. Driving without anxiety creates clean movement. You move because it makes sense, not because he's running away from something. This difference is profound. Moving away from others leads to exhaustion. Moving towards alignment generates growth. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you no longer need to convince yourself that you deserve it. Doubts about merit disappear because there is no longer internal division. You don't feel small or inflated. You feel adequate. Internal adequacy is one of the most powerful states that exist. Those who feel adequate don't beg. It doesn't get any smaller. It doesn't show off. It just remains. And remaining there creates silent authority. Silent authority organizes environments, organizes relationships, organizes decisions. You realize that people start listening to you in a different way, not because you speak differently. But why don't you waver while you speak? This lack of fluctuation is felt. Everything that is felt governs human responses. When the mind becomes a natural magnet, you realize that you no longer need to emotionally anticipate failure, not even protecting oneself from success. You are living in the present moment, whole. Wholeness eliminates noise, and without noise, the path appears. Not all, but the next step, and the next step is sufficient. An aligned mind doesn't require seeing everything in order to move forward. She trusts her own core. This confidence does not come from blind faith. It comes from the repeated experience of consistency. You stayed aligned in small moments, then in the middles, then in larger sizes, and he realized he wasn't lost. This perception creates real security. Real security sustains prosperity. Without security, everything is a threat. With safety, everything matures. A magnetic mind matures along with what it builds. She doesn't grow up too fast for herself. She doesn't push herself beyond her own structure. She respects time because she respects the body. Respect the body because you respect the mind. Everything is aligned. This alignment creates a perceptible aura of success. Not mystical, structural. An aura of emotional stability, of inner clarity, of calm demeanor. This aura doesn't draw attention because of its brightness. It is noteworthy for its lack of noise. And the world responds to the absence of noise with openness. Openness doesn't come to those who exert pressure. It comes to those who provide it. You support it, and sustainability changes everything. You feel that something within you has stabilized. Not like excitement. As a basis, you don't feel any urgency. There's no rush. You don't feel the need to run. You feel capable. Capacity to sustain more responsibility, more prosperity, more presence. His presence has changed. And because it has changed, the world responds differently, not because you asked, but because now there is something solid to answer with. That's the law. This is inevitable. This always works.